Would you feel prepared to tackle a non-traditional case interview? So not a business case, not even a public sector case. Well, as many of you guys know, I'm Brazilian, and as a Brazilian, last week I was watching the World Cup at my friend's house, the first Brazil's match against Switzerland. And although we didn't win the game, unfortunately, it was interesting because us not winning the game sparked a conversation on what would we do if we were in charge of the Brazilian team in order to win the championship. And if these were normal friends, they'd probably throw opinions on which players to use or which tactics to use. But I was hanging out with some consultants and ex-consultants, so they started creating systems on how to optimize the chances of winning the World Cup and discussing which factors you should consider and which ones you shouldn't. And in other words, they were creating a structure or a framework for this problem. And I admit it's kind of weird, but it's just how we are. Anyway, I thought this was a great opportunity for me to make a video for you showing how I would tackle a non-traditional case and how you can too. So I hope it's gonna be a fun case. I mean, it's sports, it's the World Cup, but I hope you also learn something for your interviews as well. And as a side note here, this case is actually really good to evaluate candidates for 3 reasons. The first one is that this is a mundane topic. It's a topic that everyone's talking about, at least outside of the US. So the interviewer can see if you're an opinions person or if you're a systematic, structured person. Now, the second reason why this case is so good to evaluate candidates is because the problem is really, really complex. So there are many layers to think about, and the interviewer can see how many of those layers can you notice, how many of those can you think about, and how you organize those to create a systematic process to solve the problem. The third reason why this case is so strong to evaluate candidates is because it's out of the box. So you can quickly sort candidates who can think like a consultant, who can think in a structured way, versus those that merely memorize a framework. So I wouldn't be surprised if a case like this popped up in some consulting firms in the next recruiting cycle, because it's easy to think about every consultant who's watching the World Cup right now is thinking of things like this, and because it's so good to evaluate candidates. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump right into the case question so you can see how I structure it. And one suggestion that I have is, after seeing the case question and the clarification questions part, pause the video and try to structure it yourself. You're gonna learn a lot more, and then you can compare your answer to mine. So here's the case question. It's 6 months before 2018's FIFA's World Cup. Your country's National Football Association has hired you to help them win the tournament. How would you create a plan to do that? So you don't have to help Brazil win the World Cup, but you can help your country win the World Cup. So you can do this case for your own country. We're gonna create a custom framework for this case. So not using one from a case interview book, as none would really fit a case like this. We will use techniques to create this framework that we teach in our course. So if you'd like to learn how to create frameworks like this, check out our free course at www.craftingcases.com/free course. And the technique we're going to use to create this framework is called objective-driven technique. So once you're in the course, you can go check that. We'll only go through the framework of the case, but as you'll see, from a good framework created from scratch using the objective-driven technique, you can practically see the whole case before it even unfolds. You can practically predict your interviewer's questions before they actually ask them. And we're gonna go through a few of these questions after I present my framework. Okay, so let's now structure this case. From now on, I'm just gonna speak as I would to the interviewer. Ready? Let's go. And by the way, if you wanna pause the video now and try to structure this case, this is the time to do so, okay? So let's do it. So because we still have 6 months before the tournament, I would divide this problem into before the World Cup starts and then during the competition, because it's a month-long competition, so we need to be thinking of that as well. Before it starts, I want to look into two things: how to select the best team possible and how to train the team to maximize competitiveness. Now, during the competition, I'd look at two other things. First, how to approach tactics for each specific game. So if we're playing Switzerland, if we're playing Germany, how to approach tactics for each game. And then third, and the fourth aspect, or the second one during competition, is how to handle the strategy throughout the cup. So there is the each game tactic and there is the whole tournament strategy. So let's start with how to select the best team possible. I'd look at three factors here. First, how to pick the best players. And my hypothesis is that we should look at past and recent performance per position, so defense, middle, attack, goalies, and also we should look for players who are strong in knockout situations, because the World Cup has an important knockout element, and I don't think Brazil would have a hard time passing the group phase, but then the knockout stage is more important, so I'd look for players who are good under this type of stress. The second factor I'd look into is how to ensure these players fit into a good team. And I'd be looking at both tactical, so players who play well together because they complement each other technically and tactically, but also the psychological aspects. These are going to be a bunch of dudes who are going to be locked up for a month in Russia, and I want guys who can motivate each other and who can bring strong support to each other, instead of guys who are going to be putting each other down or partying all the time. Now, the third thing is how to make sure these players get into the tournament in the best possible shape. So when I'm talking about selecting the best team, I'm talking about the team as of when the tournament starts. So I want to select players who are going to be with no injuries and physically energetic, not tired. And a couple hypotheses here is one, that we can control, because we're the national association, we can control a bit of how the national the teams play, so we can reschedule matches of other competitions so that these guys are not tired, and we could also probably bring some support for them not to get injured. Now, in order to train the team to maximize competitiveness, I think we're looking at this at two levels. First, the physical training level. So we'll probably have a couple months before the World Cup starts to train this team. And I want them to be physically fit. And second, I want them to have tactical training so that they can play together and know the tactics well. And for both of these, I think there are some elements that we should look into. We want to look into best practices for this type of tournament, and we can look that within football but also in other sports. I want to look into equipment that we need to provide. I want to look into training conditions, so where they're going to train. I want to look to have the right people to do physical and tactical training. Now, during the competition, there are other aspects to look into. So first, how to approach tactics for each specific game. First, I would look at how to study other teams to predict how they will play. So I don't really know how this works, but I imagine there is a team of specialists who study the other teams, and we can allocate these experts to study even before the competition, but also during the competition, how these teams are playing so that we can predict how they will play. Now, if there is no such team of specialists doing this type of study, then that's an opportunity for us to improve, but there likely is. In case there is, how can we make them better? So we can probably learn from other sports here, basketball, American football, whatever sports, what types of practices do these teams of specialists do to predict how the other team will play. And there is a component here which is kind of game theoretic, because you're trying to second guess the other team, and if they know that, they can try to trick you into thinking something. So we need to be aware of that. Second thing, how to set up team tactics for the most likely scenarios. And the third thing is how to adapt these tactics in case things go differently. So I'd look for archetypes of types of teams that we might face, and then for highly likely teams, study those specific teams and create tactics for each archetype or for each key opponent. So maybe we should have a tactic for teams of really tall people who rely on doing goals with the heads, by shooting with their heads. Maybe we should have tactics for highly defensive teams or highly offensive teams. And then we also need to have adaptation of these tactics in case things go differently. So we may have a tactic for a defense team because we expect the other team to be in defense, but then we need to have kind of branches of these tactics that we can change quickly as the game or as the match unfolds, because maybe they become really offensive throughout the match, and then we can adapt the tactic to become defensive. So we need to think about tactics and studying the other teams and having pre-made tactics that evolve as the competition goes for each likely team or archetype of opponent. Now, how to handle this strategy throughout the World Cup? I think there's a few factors here. First, how to increase the chances by gaming the point system in the group phase. So I know that we fall into a group of 4 teams and if we win this group, we get the second place in the other group, or if we get second, we get the first place in that group. Now, it might be useful to be able to be flexible. So in the last match in the group phase, we have the ability of trying to win, so we get in first, or of losing the game on purpose, or having a draw so that we fall into second. And we would do that in order to get a weaker opponent in the first game of the knockout phase. So this is kind of strategy of the cup, but maybe finishing first is better because of motivational issues. So that brings us to the second point, how to maintain team motivation and morale. Here we'd look for the psychology of each player, so it would be nice to have a profile, know what keeps them motivated. Also, maybe have specialists to follow the team dynamics, maybe psychologists or people that work with this in sports teams. And also be aware of communication with the media, of the story that we tell ourselves within the team. So what kind of story do we tell as the strategy? What's the story that players tell themselves if they lose a match? Is it, we're never going to win this? Or is it, okay, that's part of the game. Now, what can we do differently in the next game? So we have to be aware of the story, of the media communication, and perhaps even isolate them from listening to the media. I don't know if that's more helpful or actually harmful. And then also having professionals to take care of this. And then the third thing, how to handle player wear out. So how to minimize the chances that they get injured in the World Cup, both because maybe opponents are trying to injure our best players on purpose, or because it just happens, it's part of the game. And also how to minimize how much they get tired. So I would probably here map out the endurance of our key players, and for those that are really good but don't have a lot of endurance, try to work them out before the competition starts. But then after the competition starts, maybe spare them of some games or of playing half a game so that they don't get too tired. So we can map out what players are more likely to be injured or tired and have a specific strategy for each one of them in order to have them really healthy and energetic at the end of the competition where we need them most. So this is how I would set up a plan to solve this problem. A lot of it comes to talking to people, and there are more questions there than answers here, but that's kind of the purpose, because we'd have to talk to experts and talk to people who are playing the game and to the players as well, so that we can figure out the best answers to each one of those questions. Now you might be asking yourself, what happens next in this case? Well, since this framework was a plan to solve the problem, and your framework should be plans to solve the problem too, it actually has the power to predict what will come next if it's a good plan. So for example, your interviewer could ask you a brainstorming question. What are some ideas that you have on how to make the players that we pick a good psychological and tactical fit? So they got an issue of my framework and asked to expand it into different ideas. This is a brainstorming question. It's actually two questions packed into one. Another thing they could ask is, well, they could throw you a chart with different training regimens showing the risks of each one, the impact on fatigue and the risk of injuries during the competition, and ask you to come up with your own assessment or your own evaluation of which training regimen looks the best. So this is a chart interpretation question, and it's actually about an issue that we got in our framework. Another one that they could ask is a hypothesis testing question. So for example, they could ask you to test the hypothesis that you can actually come up with a few tactics that would fit different opponent archetypes, so that you can pre-plan your tactics to this game. How would you test this hypothesis? One way you could do it is to ask an expert, but there are other ways. And if you know how to test hypotheses in different ways, you can impress your interviewer more once they ask you this question. So a lot of the questions they can ask you come from the framework, because the framework is a plan to solve the problem. And if your framework was good, it was able to predict what are the important things in this case. Now, they may come up with a question about something that was not in your framework, and that's okay. I mean, your framework is not perfect. No framework is perfect. But just be aware that your framework should predict a lot of what comes next in the case, or it's probably not a good one. Now, all of this has nothing to do with business. It's about football, but it has a lot to do with how consultants think. So a consultant from McKinsey, from Bain, from BCG, they will tackle a business problem as they will tackle a public sector problem, as they will tackle a football World Cup problem. And because they tackle these problems in the same way, and they want to see how you would tackle a problem, and if you're able to think like they do, they can actually use cases like this in their recruiting process, and a lot of firms do. If you've liked this video, I think you're gonna love another video that I make on creating a framework from scratch, this time for a market entry case. I'm gonna put the link up here so you can get access now. Also, there's a whole playlist on how to improve your frameworks, and another playlist on how to create MECE structures. There's 5 techniques for that, the 5 ways to be MECE. So if you wanna see that, just click on the link below on the crafting cases link, so that you can get access to our channel, subscribe to our channel, and check out those playlists as well. Also, if you want to learn how to build structures from scratch, like the one I did in this video, and even to predict what questions your interviewer may ask you throughout the case, visit our free course on case interview fundamentals. It's unlike anything you've seen in the internet, because we've actually developed a system for you to learn how to think like a consultant, and that you can practice with practical examples that we put in our course as well. You can get access to that at craftingcases.com/free course. I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the like button down there. And also let me know in the comments if you like videos like this one on fun topics, so a World Cup case interview, because I have some other ideas for those, and if enough people put in the comments that you want different cases, more fun cases on topics that are going on in the world right now, or otherwise, if enough people tell me that in the comments, I'm probably gonna put more time into creating these videos as well. So I hope you've liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.